Welcome to The Hidden Truth. We're still pretty new to YouTube, and we're looking to expand our channel. If you enjoy our videos, please consider sharing them on social media or other UFO communities. Your support means everything to us.
We have an exciting announcement. For the month of July, we'll be doing a giveaway. All you have to do is like and comment on our videos for the chance to win a variety of prizes, including hats, shirts, and more. The more you like and comment, the greater your chances. Oh, and subscribing doesn't hurt either. What are you waiting for? Smash that like button. You can get free stuff.
Here are some UFO-related incidents from the 1940s in the United Kingdom. There is not a lot of information to be found about each incident.
The date was February 1942. The location was Cheltenham High Street, a borough on the outskirts of Gloucestershire in England. The witness was a woman named Eileen Arnold. The witness claimed that she was walking down Cheltenham High Street when she suddenly experienced an altered state of consciousness as she became tuned into another reality. She became aware of a large oval shape moving slowly above the rooftops. She stated that it radiated light from holes in its side and had quills which detached one by one, also emitting light. There was nobody else out on the street, and Arnold wondered if she was just imagining this entire episode, or perhaps observing some new type of German spycraft. In the weeks following her encounter with the saucer, the witness arrived at the conclusion that the object was of otherworldly origin, as she had numerous other paranormal and psychic experiences.
I do not know what to make about this one. No other witnesses of any kind, no physical evidence, very little information to be found. It could be real, could be false, or maybe delusions of an unsound mind.
The date was September 1942. The location was Newbiggin-on-Sea, Northumbria, England. The witness, Albert Lancaster, stated that he was abducted by aliens while working as a guard at a radar site near Newbiggin-on-Sea, Northumbria. Lancaster claimed to have a sudden urge to go outside, followed by a strange impulse to look at the sky. Lancaster advised he saw a glowing light surrounded by dark mist and, assuming it to be a German weapon, Lancaster went to raise the alarm before being struck by a beam of light from the cloud, followed by a floating sensation. Then becoming aware he was back at his post. Following this experience, Lancaster believed he had psychic powers for a period of time.
I do not know what to make about this one. No other witnesses of any kind, no physical evidence, very little information to be found. It could be real, could be false, or maybe delusions of an unsound mind.
The date was August 5, 1944. The place was near the English coastline. According to records released on the 5th of August 2010, British wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill banned the reporting, for 50 years, of an alleged UFO incident because of fears it could create mass panic. Reports given to Churchill claimed the incident involved a Royal Air Force RAF reconnaissance plane returning from a mission in France or Germany toward the end of the Second World War. Allegedly, when flying over or near the English coastline, the aircraft was suddenly intercepted by a strange metallic object that matched its course and speed for a time before accelerating away and disappearing. The plane's crew were reported to have photographed the object, which they said had hovered noiselessly near the aircraft, before moving off. According to the documents, details of the cover-up emerged when a man wrote to the government in 1999 seeking to find out more about the incident. He described how his grandfather, who served with the RAF in the Second World War, was present when Churchill and U.S. General Dwight Eisenhower discussed how to deal with the UFO encounter. The files come from more than 5,000 pages of UFO reports, letters, and drawings from members of the public, as well as questions raised by members of the UK Parliament.
This incident is a bit more serious, with there being top-secret records kept hidden for so long by Winston Churchill. I tried, and failed, to find the above-mentioned photographs.
Operation Charlie 1947. When flying saucers began to be reported over the United States in the summer of 1947. Bewildered U.S. Army Air Force intelligence experts queried Allied governments. The UK Air Ministry was able to inform them that it had already conducted an investigation into unidentified flying objects recently tracked on radar and that the mystery remained unexplained. According to Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, first chief of the USAF's Project Blue Book, the British ghost aeroplanes of 1947 were cited in a legendary top-secret dossier prepared by Air Technical Intelligence in 1948 and circulated as far as the Chief of the Air Force, General Hoyt Vandenberg. Its name estimate of the situation. Its conclusion: the sources were probably interplanetary spaceships. From just after the end of the Second World War until early 1947. At a time when the world had yet to hear of flying saucers and when the concept of UFOs still lay far in the future. Britain's radar defences reacted many times to what appeared to be fast, agile intruders entering UK airspace at high altitude over the east coast. Interception attempts by RAF fighters repeatedly failed. Officially, these were treated as intrusions by unidentified aircraft or X-raids after the X designation given to uncorrelated radar tracks. Unofficially, the radar operators gave the intruder a name Charlie, and when the Air Ministry began a concerted effort to solve the mystery, its code name was Operation Charlie. To the newspapers and to the public, they were ghost aeroplanes.
What were these unknown aircraft? It was designed as top secret. They must have more than just weather balloons and the planet Venus. The RAF fighters couldn't catch them, and you would think they would have some of the best military planes in 1947. I think the conclusion of the saucers were probably interplanetary spaceships is very fitting. Must have been before the government's policy of deny and lie. In this case, the core events remain very difficult to explain. The year is 1950. The place? RAF Tangmere, England. A Gloucester meteor at RAF Tangmere passes a flying saucer lit up with lights. This was described as Britain's first flying saucer. The object was reported to be shining, revolving, and disc-like at 20,000 feet at 1430 hours, flying eastwards over the Portsmouth area. RAF Tangmere asked the radio station at RAF Wartling in Sussex if it had seen the object, and it had on its PPI screen. It led to the setting up of the Flyer Saucer Working Party.
On June 1, 1950, at about 1430 hours, the pilot of a Meteor reported while flying at 20,000 feet on an easterly course over the Portsmouth area. The pilot had sighted an object traveling at very high speed on a reciprocal course, 1,000 to 2,000 feet above him and roughly 1.200 yards to starboard. The pilot described the object as circular, and of a bright metallic appearance. The pilot could not give any real estimate of its speed but thought it might be about 800 knots. He had observed it for about 15 seconds, during which period he had looked away to port and back, having no difficulty in picking up the object again. RAF Tangmere made inquiries of the radar station at Wartling and was informed that, at about the same time as the pilot's report, the duty controller and 3 radar operators had observed an unusual response on the PPI which appeared to be due to a target moving at 1300 to 1650 knots, first approaching and then receding from the station. The controller stated that the response looked to be very thick, leaving more afterglow than a usual response behind. The operator, observing on a separate display, said that it was slim, short and weaker than aircraft, and that a series of shadows appeared in the space between successive points, as the receding course of the radar target could have tallied with the course of the object reported by the Meteor pilot. All the people concerned were interviewed by a member of the research branch, Fighter Command, from whose report the above data have been taken.
It was estimated that there was in fact a discrepancy of 10 minutes between the times of the 2 reports, which was estimated as individually accurate to 1 minute. It must therefore be concluded that there was no connection between the usual PPI response and the pilot's visual observation. We believe that the radar response can be very simply explained as due to interference from another transmitter, a phenomenon which has been frequently observed. It is impossible to be entirely definite about the pilot's report, assuming that he was not merely the victim of an optical illusion. The most probable explanation, which is borne out by his description of the object as circular, implying a spherical body, is that he saw a meteorological balloon and greatly overestimated its speed. We can find no reason whatsoever for adopting a less simple hypothesis. This would be a great incident with a trained military pilot with on-the-ground radar confirmation, but there isn't any names I could find with any of the involved parties. The official explanation of the incident is laughable at best. The old "explain it away using any means possible" applies here. The year is 1950. The place? Farnborough, England. An experienced pilot observed a 50-foot diameter disc UFO over the Royal Aircraft Establishment, at close range in good weather conditions. On August 7, 1950, at about 11:27 hours, the witness, Lieutenant Stan Hubbards of the British Air Force, observed an object flying over Farnborough, RAE. The witness stated,
"The events began on the morning of the 14th of August 1950. A lovely Hampshire summer day. Warm, dry, and clear. I heard a strange distant humming sound from the direction of Basingstoke. The noise grew more distinct and more intense, and I clearly remember pausing and turning in mid-stride to see what it could possibly be. To say that I was astonished is a profound understatement. Coming directly towards the airfield was an object entirely unlike anything I had ever seen before. Edge on. It appeared to be something like a discus we used to hurl on sports day at school, and as it came closer I could see that it was indeed very similar in shape. Initially, it seemed that its angular altitude and attitude, above the horizon, were enough to indicate that it was well airborne, but its lack of identifying features made it difficult to classify or easily estimate either its size or distance away. It was coming straight towards me and was holding a straight course. But it was rocking laterally, gently from side to side, about 20 degrees or so, while steadily maintaining its heading. The sound emanating from this strange object increased markedly as it got closer, to a heavy, dominant humming with an associated subdued crackling hissing sound, which reminded me strongly of the ambient noise inside a large active electrical power generating station. As the object came closer, its overall shape, more closely now resembling a sports discus, could be clearly detailed, and its general outer surface could be seen to have a satiny shimmering mother-of-pearl sort of finish. As it rocked laterally back and forth, I was reminded of the opposing segments of reflected light that rotate back and forth that one sees when a shiny aluminum pan lid is tilted back and forth to reflect ambient light. This object came very close, quickly passing directly overhead, and the first impressions of color and surface finish were strongly reinforced. The exterior was almost entirely featureless, except that the periphery was edged by a band of a darker color with indistinct markings of some sort, which kept changing in appearance, but from which emanated strange bluish flickering of points of light, very much like the little blue plumes of flame from a gas ring on a cooking stove, but turned upside down. I also got the impression that either the main body or the peripheral rim was rotating. It also seemed quite clear that the sibilant cracking hissing sound came from this circle of flicking light. There appeared to be a definite connection, and most remarkably there was a concurrent smell of ozone that normally is associated with heavy electrical discharges. And again, like the odor inside a power station. As the object was coming closer and then went overhead, I tried to estimate its size, altitude, and speed, but with the absence of any readily identifiable feature, it was difficult to gauge these factors with any confidence. Taking the angle of the object above the horizon when I first observed it as a datum from which to get some idea of its height and distance away, and then connecting this with the impression as it passed overhead, I guessed that its height above the ground when first seen was probably between 700 and 1.000 feet, and since it certainly seemed to maintain altitude throughout the period of my observation, I guessed that it would have traveled until it went out of sight. It must have been traveling very fast, perhaps as high as 500 to 900 knots. But there was no sense whatsoever of air disturbance due to its passing. As the saucer disappeared into the distance, I recalled hearing screaming and shouting from the flight dispatcher's office nearby. A dispatcher came running towards him in a hysterical state, shouting, "Stan, did you see that awful thing?" She was comforted by another airman but was extremely upset, almost irrational.
After the event, Hubbard was interrogated by scientific intelligence officers from London. He was advised not to discuss this matter with anyone, including his boss. The witness, who is a qualified Air Force pilot, gave an extremely detailed statement. What was this mysterious ship? Only 3 options here. 1. The witness is lying. Nothing to be gained about lying about this in 1950. 2. An unknown secret military craft that is many decades ahead of its time. We still do not know about it. Or 3. A genuine, extraordinary aircraft of unknown origin. The year is 1950. The place? Wilderness Country Club, Sevenoaks, United Kingdom. Witnesses advised that they observed an unknown bright object in the sky traveling in an easterly direction. There was no obvious means of propulsion, and the object traveled in complete silence. On December 10th, 1950, at about 1930 hours, Group Captain Cartmill of the Deputy Directorate of Equipment made the following report.
Unidentified aircraft. Although there may be some good explanation for it, I wish to report an unusual occurrence which I witnessed at 19:30 hours last night. Sunday, the 10th of December. I tabulate details below. Place Wilderness Country Club. 1.5 miles NE of Sevenoaks, Kent. Object seen bright light is sky moving in west-east direction which did not alter in size or intensity of light during movement. No flame or navigation lights were visible. Weather, raining sky 10/10 overcast. Cloud base estimate 3 to 4,000 feet. Wind negligible. Height and speed although weather conditions made assessment difficult. I estimate the object maintained a steady height of about 3,000 feet at approximately 130 to 150 miles per hour. It was visible for about 5 minutes until it passed out of sight behind the club buildings. The matter which really drew my attention to it was the complete absence of sound. 2 friends who were with me witnessed the entire occurrence. Although I am an equipment officer, I have done nearly 1,400 hours flying in 81 types of aircraft and I held a pilot's license before. Therefore, I feel you might regard the assessments I have made as reasonably accurate. I would be interested to know if this information is of any value and whether or not there is an explanation to the phenomena of straight and level flight without sound.
The report was basically dismissed out of hand, stating the moon or conventional aircraft. The witness was a military officer and professional observer. It seems odd that he could not tell the difference between the moon and an aircraft. I also would think that the reported weather conditions will make the moon explanation impossible. This is a common theme where real reports are officially dismissed out of hand with something ridiculous like the moon or a weather balloon. The most interesting part of this report is the silent running. What aircraft could travel at that speed in 1950 and could be silent running? August 26, 1950. In the early hours of the morning, a 20-year-old woman was walking back to her home in the village of Stanton Drew, Somerset, from a party, when she decided to take a shortcut through a field near to the stone circles, whereupon she heard a buzzing sound. She turned to her left and noticed a bright saucer-shaped object hovering over the next field. A door on the craft began to open, and she screamed, started to run, and didn't stop until she got home. The year is 1952. The place? RAF Topcliffe, which is a Royal Air Force station in North Yorkshire, England. A silver disc-shaped UFO followed a British meteor jet for a few seconds, then took off at an unnatural speed and disappeared. On September 19, 1952, at about 10:53 hours, during an RAF exercise, 2 RAF officers and 3 aircrew witnessed the event. The report was made by Flight Lieutenant John Kilburn, who stated,
"The meteor was crossing from east to west when I noticed the white object in the sky. This object was silver and circular in shape. About 10.000 feet, some 5 miles astern from the aircraft. It appeared to be traveling at a lower speed than the meteor but was on the same course. I said, 'What the hell is that?' And the chaps looked to where I was pointing. But as we watched, the disc maintained a slow forward speed for a few seconds before starting to descend. While descending, it was swinging in a pendulum fashion from left to right. As the meteor turned to start its landing run, the object appeared to be following it. But after a few seconds it stopped its descent and hung in the air, rotating as if on its own axis. Then it accelerated an incredible speed to the west, turned southeast and disappeared. It is difficult to estimate the object's speed. The incident happened in a matter of 15 to 20 seconds. During the few seconds that it rotated, we could see it flashing in the sunshine. It appeared to be about the size of a Vampire jet aircraft at a similar height. We are all convinced that it was some type of solid object."
Intelligence officers at RAF Topcliffe interrogated the officers and crew. The Air Ministry eventually admitted that they were unable to explain the sighting after 11 weeks of inquiry. The incident is really hard to explain away. Qualified military officer observers witnessed something very unusual during great weather and visibility conditions. The craft's maneuvers and acceleration were way beyond any known terrestrial airplanes in 1952. The year is 1952. The place? Gloucestershire, England. A Gloucester meteor and 3 unidentified saucer-shaped objects had an encounter in the sky. On October 21st, 1952, in the afternoon hours, Flight Lieutenant Michael Sweeney and Lieutenant David Crofts of the British Royal Navy observed three objects over Gloucestershire while flying their jet at 12,000 feet. At this time, they took off from RAF Little Rissington in a Gloucester Meteor, powered by two Rolls-Royce Derwent engines, on a training flight. At 12,000 feet, they came through a layer of cloud to witness three white saucer-shaped objects, which they reported to be at 35,000 feet. Initially, the pilots had believed the saucer-shaped objects to be three parachutes. The pilots noted that the shape of the saucers were perfectly circular, and their Meteor aircraft climbed to 35,000 feet. Sweeney reported the sightings of the three saucer objects to his ground control at RAF Sopley, and abruptly cancelled the training flight. Crofts asked whether to pursue the three objects, but Sweeney declined. The three objects crossed over the Meteor's path, from left to right. The objects remained on their starboard side. In a fraction of a second, the objects disappeared. ATCC Gloucester, RAF Staverton, now Gloucestershire Airport next to Junction 11 of the M5, confirmed the three objects that the pilots had seen. Two Meteor aircraft of RAF Fighter Command were scrambled to intercept the objects. The objects were heading east at 600 knots. The fighter aircraft did not make contact with the objects. The RAF Southern Sector, based in Wiltshire, had detected three objects entering their airspace at 3,000 miles per hour. Upon returning to base, the pilots were separated and debriefed by unknown agents about the incident. The witnesses, who were qualified Air Force pilots, gave extremely detailed statements in interviews. What were these mysterious objects? Three saucer-shaped UFOs in the 1950s that were witnessed in the air and from radar traveling at great speeds. Sounds like something from out of this world. The year is 1953. The place? RAF West Malling, which is a Royal Air Force base in Kent, England. A military jet was approached by a large UFO at 20,000 feet. On November 3rd, 1953, at about 1000 hours, RAF officer T.S. Johnson and his navigator, G. Smith, were flying a Vampire jet at 20,000 feet near their base in Kent. At this time, they witnessed a star-like stationary light at a much higher altitude than they were at. Suddenly, the object moved towards them at tremendous speed. The object was circular and was emitting a very bright light around its periphery. The sighting only lasted 30 seconds in all. It is unknown where the UFO went to next. The officers made a report and were interrogated for over 2 hours by RAF intelligence. The final report of the incident was an experimental balloon. Apparently, those experienced pilots could not tell the difference between a balloon and a moving object. Also, the British had some awesome balloons that could descend and maneuver at tremendous speeds. This is an obvious lie that you will see repeated over and over again. When all else fails, the old weather balloon story. The year is 1954. The place? Southend in Essex, England. An RAF pilot had a close encounter while flying with three UFOs at 16,000 feet. On October 14th, 1954, at about 16:15 hours, RAF Flight Lieutenant Salandon of number 604, County of Middlesex Squadron, Royal Auxiliary Air Force, took off at 16:15 hours from his base at RAF North Weald in Essex in a Meteor Mk8 jet. The weather was perfect. He stated that,
"When I was at about 16,000 feet, I saw a whole lot of contrails possibly at 30-40,000 feet over North Foreland. Through the middle of the trails I saw three objects which I thought were airplanes. But they weren't trailing, they came down through the middle that towards Southend and then headed towards me. When they got within a certain distance, two of them went off to my port side, one gold and one silver, and the third object came straight toward me and closed to within a few hundred yards, almost filling the windscreen. Then it went off toward my port side. I tried to turn round to follow, but it had gone. It was a saucer shaped with a bun on top and a bun underneath, and was silvery and metallic. There were no portholes, flames, or anything."
Salandon immediately reported the incident by radio to North Weald. The report was sent to the Air Ministry, but nothing was ever heard about it. This incident is really hard to explain away. A qualified military officer witnessed something very unusual during great weather and visibility conditions. These types of crafts could not have existed by any known government in 1954. The year is 1955. The place? Bexley Heath, England. On King Harold's Way in Bexley Heath, in the London borough of Bexley, a 30-foot wide saucer-shaped object was seen to hover a few feet above a street in broad daylight. It was a very hot, cloudless day. The event was witnessed by around 30 people. Car engines nearby to the object stalled. The object made a humming noise. The object landed at a junction of Ashbourne Road and Whitfield Road. It hovered over Bendenwell Primary School for around 1 minute. Finally, the object shot off into the sky. On July 17, 1955, at 1200 hours, the witness, Rodney Maynard, from Belvedere, and about 30 other people observed an object in the middle of the street. The witness advised,
"We were on our lunch break when we heard something was happening in King Harold's Way. So we went up there to have a look. This thing had landed in the roadway. It took up the whole width of the road and overlapped onto the pavements. It wasn't on the ground. It had about 8 massive suckers. The center was still, but the outer rim was spinning slowly and it had white lights flashing. Like a camera flash. There were about 30 of us staring at it. We could hear it humming. It had what looked like windows, but the glass was concave and molded together so you couldn't see in. A couple of us went forward to try and touch it and it began to spin faster. Then it lifted slowly off the ground and hovered above our heads. Tilting slightly, the craft moved slowly until it was over Bendenwell Primary School, where it stayed for about a minute. Then shot up into the sky and disappeared. It was black, sleek, and streamlined with a surface like polished metal. It was very fine and beautiful. It's certainly wasn't a prank. I have never forgotten it, but I don't talk about it because people would think you were balmy."
Another witness was Margaret Fry. She advised that she had lived in Hythe Avenue and was making her way to the doctor's office. She and the doctor, Dr. Thucarda, both saw what she described as an enormous craft hovering over the doctor's car. She described the craft as saucer-shaped, with a blue, silver, gray, pewter texture, yet none of those colors. Mrs. Fry said it also had what looked like 3 spheres inset into its base, one of which flopped out, landing on the ground at the junction of nearby Ashbourne and Whitfield Road. A group of 12 children who were playing nearby saw it and went over to have a closer look, before it rose up from the ground and shot into the sky, disappearing from sight after a few minutes. This one is straightforward. Multiple witnesses, during clear daytime hours, observed something very unusual at close range. The military at that time did not have anything even close to this type of aircraft. It's very hard to put this one as swamp gas or the planet Venus. The year is 1955. The place? Broadlands Estates near Romsey, Hampshire, England. A UFO landed and an occupant was observed. The witness was incapacitated by the UFO and it flew away at great speed. On February 23, 1955, at about 0830 hours, the witness, Frederick Briggs, a bricklayer working at Broadlands Estates, advised,
"I am at present employed at Broadlands as a bricklayer and was cycling to my work from Romsey on the morning of Wednesday, the 23rd of February 1955, when I was about halfway between the Palmerston or Romsey Lodge and the house. Just by where the drive forks off to the Middlebridge Lodge. I suddenly saw an object hovering stationary over the field between the end of the gardens and Middlebridge Drive, and just on the house side of the little stream. The object was shaped like a child's huge humming top and halfway between 20 feet or 30 feet in diameter. Its color was like dull aluminum, rather like a kitchen saucepan. It was shaped like the sketch which I have endeavored to make, and had portholes all round the middle, rather like a steamer has. The time was just after 8:30 a.m. with an overcast sky and light snow on the ground. I turned off the drive at the fork and rode over the grass for rather less than 100 yards. I then dismounted, and holding my bicycle in my right hand, watched, while I was watching a column, about the thickness of a man, descended from the center of the saucer, and I suddenly noticed on it what appeared to be a man, presumably standing on a small platform on the end. He did not appear to be holding on to anything. He seemed to be dressed in a dark suit of overalls, and was wearing a close-fitting hat or helmet. At the time the saucer was certainly less than 100 yards from me, and not more than 60 feet over the level where I was standing. Although the meadow has a steep bank at this point, so that the saucer would have been about 80 feet over the lower level of the meadow. As I stood there watching, I suddenly saw a curious light come on in one of the portholes. It was a bluish light, rather like a mercury vapor light. Although it was quite bright, it did not appear to be directed straight at me, nor did it dazzle me, but simultaneously with the light coming on I suddenly seemed to be pushed over, and I fell down in the snow with my bicycle on top of me. What is more, I could not get up again. Although the bicycle only weighs a few pounds, it seemed as if an unknown force was holding me down. Whilst lying on the ground I could see the tube withdrawn quickly into the saucer, which then rose vertically, quite as fast as the fastest jet aircraft I have seen. Or faster. There had been no noise whatever until the saucer started to move. And even then the noise was no louder than that of an ordinary small rocket let off by a child on Guy Fawkes night. It disappeared out of sight into the clouds almost instantaneously. And as it went, I found myself able to get up. Although I seemed to be lying a long time on the ground, I do not suppose. In reality, it was more than a few seconds. I felt rather dizzy, as though I had received a near knockout blow on the chin. But of course there was no physical hurt of any sort. Merely a feeling of dizziness. I picked up my bicycle, mounted it and rode straight on to Broadlands, where I met Heath standing by the garage. I was feeling very shaky and felt I must regain my confidence by discussing what I had seen. I said to him, "Look, Ron, have you known me long enough to know that I am sane and sober at this hour of the morning?" He laughed and made some remark like, "Well, of course." Then I told him what I had seen. Heath and I went back along the road where I showed him the tracks of my bicycle. I then went back to work, where I saw my foreman, Mr. Hudson, and told him what I had seen.
It appears that something extraordinary occurred during this event. There were no known aircraft that could silently hover and fly away at great speed during 1955. The year is 1956. The place? At RAF/USAF base in Bentwaters, Lakenheath, Suffolk, England. At least one UFO was tracked by both ground and airborne radar. The object, or objects, was also witnessed by ground personnel. On August 14, 1956, overnight, the witness, FHC Wimbledon, RAF fighter controller on duty at RAF Needish, Norfolk at the time, advised,
I was chief controller on duty at the main RAF radar station in East Anglia on the night in question. My duties were to monitor the radar picture and to scramble the battle flight, who were on duty 24 hours a day, to intercept any intruder of British airspace not positively identified in my sector of responsibility. I remember Lakenheath USAF base telephoning to say there was something buzzing their airfield circuit. I scrambled a Venom night fighter from the battle flight through sector, and my controller in the interception cabin took over control of it. The interception control team would consist of one fighter controller, an officer, a corporal, a tracker and a height reader. That is, 4 highly trained personnel in addition to myself could now clearly see the object on our radar scopes after being vectored onto the trail of the object by my interception controller. The pilot called out, "Contact," then a short time later, "Judy," which meant the navigator had the target fairly and squarely on his own radar screen and needed no further help from the ground. He continued to close on the target, but after a few seconds, and in the space of 1 or 2 sweeps of our scopes, the object appeared behind our fighter. Our pilot called out, "Lost contact, more help," and he was told the target was now behind him and he was given fresh instructions. I then scrambled a second Venom which was vectored toward the area, but before it arrived on the scene the target had disappeared from our scopes, and although we continued to keep a careful watch, was not seen by us. The fact remains that at least 9 RAF ground personnel and 2 RAF aircrew were conscious of an object sufficiently solid to give returns on radar. Naturally, all this was reported and a senior officer from the Air Ministry came down and interrogated us.
A very unusual radar case with an unknown number of objects that were behaving very strangely and witnessed by multiple people. The year is 1956. The place? Near the RAF station at Lincolnshire, England. A large, spherical glass-like, 80-foot in diameter object was seen over the coast for over an hour and also seen on radar from RAF Manby. RAF planes approached the object and it disappeared. On September 22, 1956, at 1500 hours, the witness, Rodney Maynard, from Belvedere, and about 30 other people observed an object in the middle of the street. At this time, scores of people at Lincolnshire witnessed something truly extraordinary in the sky. A silent, glowing orb sat motionlessly above the North Sea and was clearly observed by a large crowd of onlookers who had gathered on the promenade at Clearthorpe to review the spectacle. The object also caught the attention of a nearby RAF station at Manby. It was detected on radar, then observed through powerful telescopes. It was said to be approximately 80 feet wide, composed of glass-like substance and hovering at a height of 54,000 feet. Perhaps fearing that the object was some secret Soviet WMD, the RAF scrambled 2 fireplanes to intercept the strange flying craft. However, as the planes approached the UFO, it literally vanished from sight, leaving the pilots and hundreds of other people on the ground well and truly dumbfounded. The event remains one of the UK's many unsolved UFO cases. I couldn't find too much information about this incident. Strange, but not very conclusive. If the object was captured on radar, then it removes the possibility that it was a trick of light or something similar. In April 1957, a large object was seen on radar at RAF Westfro near Stranraer at 50,000 feet, which was stationary for 10 minutes over the Irish Sea. It moved vertically to 70,000 feet and was also tracked by radar at Ardwell. The object did an impossible sharp turn and was described as being as large as a ship, bigger than a normal aircraft. On April 4, 1957, at RAF Westfro near Stranraer, while monitoring a test bombing exercise, radar units of the Ministry of Supply Bombing Trials Unit, headquartered at RAF Westfro, observed the UK's most reported UFO incident. Awaiting a test over Luce Bay from an aircraft RAE Farnborough, the civilian radar operators of the Ministry of Supply were told to turn their sets off due to a delay. One unit at Balskalloch near Corswall Point did not receive the signal. They observed a large and solid unidentified echo, an almost stationary object, located above the Irish Sea. It remained stationary for 10 minutes at an initial height of 50,000 feet, 20 to 25 miles north of Stranraer. Its height then increased to 70,000 feet. The Balskalloch unit contacted Westfro Air Traffic Control and informed the controller that there were now several moving targets. These were moving at speeds of thousands of miles per hour, and the echoes were like nothing the radar operator had ever seen before. Westfro observed the targets, as did the now switched-on Ardwell unit, 14 miles to their south, confirming the observation. After 10 minutes, the position began to move northeast at speeds gradually increasing up to 70 miles per hour, and at a height of 54,000 feet. A third radar station then confirmed the target, and noted that after the radar echo had traveled about 20 miles, it did an impossible sharp turn and proceeded in a southeasterly direction, whilst increasing its speed. The third station then tracked 4 objects at 14,000 feet altitude and 4,000 yards line astern from each other, which was confirmed by Balskalloch. The radar operators noted the echoes were much larger than those of normal planes, size being nearer to that of a ship. RAF intelligence ordered radar stations throughout the UK to be on 24-hour alert. A few days later, civilian operators reported the incident to various newspapers, including the Sunday Dispatch, which published the incident on April 7, 1957. An Air Ministry spokesman declined to make a detailed statement until a full report had been studied by experts, while Wing Commander Walter Whitworth, RAF Westfro commanding officer, made an Air Ministry-approved statement.
I have been ordered by the Air Ministry to say nothing about the object. I am not allowed to reveal its position, course, and speed. From the moment of picking it up, it was well within our area. It was an object of some substance, quite definitely not a freak. No mistake could have been made by the civilians operating the sets. They are fully qualified and experienced officers.
Questions were asked in Parliament, and the Air Ministry were eventually obliged to admit they were unable to explain the incident. As the incident had leaked to the press, internal RAF records were well preserved, although details of official records are protected by the Official Secrets Act. However, in an RAF meeting minutes document of 1970, Whitworth additionally commented that,
after remaining stationary for a short time, the UFO began to rise vertically with no forward movement, rising rapidly to approximately 60.000 feet in much less than a minute. The UFO then began to move in an easterly direction, slowly at first but later accelerating very fast and traveling towards Newton Stewart. Losing height on the way, suddenly the UFO turned to the southeast, picking up speed to 240 miles per hour as it moved towards the Isle of Man. It was at this stage that the radar signals became contradictory. Balskalloch tracked a single object at high altitude while Ardwell picked up what appeared to be 4 separate objects moving line astern behind each other at a height of 14.000 feet. As the echoes disappeared, all 3 radars fleetingly traced the 4 smaller UFOs trailing behind the larger object. The UFO had been tracked for 36 minutes.
The year is 1956. The place? North Sea, England. An American fighter pilot flying from an English airbase at the height of the Cold War was ordered to open fire on a massive, unidentified object that had lit up his radar screen. On May 20th, 1957, nighttime, the witness, Milton Torres, flying a USAF F-860 Sabre, an American fighter pilot was sent to intercept an unusual object, which had been picked up on radar at a Royal Air Force station on the southeastern tip of England. Milton Torres advised this was a flying object with very unusual flight patterns. Milton also advised he had been ordered to fire a full salvo of rockets at the UFO, which was moving erratically over the North Sea, but that at the last moment the object picked up great speed and disappeared from his radar. Milton Torres said he never saw the UFO directly, but watched in awe as it appeared on the jet's radar screen and then sped off before he could fire. He advised that the object spent periods motionless in the sky before reaching estimated speeds of more than 7,600 miles per hour. Milton Torres also advised, "I shall never forget it. On that night I was ordered to open fire even before I had taken off. That had never happened before." Milton Torres further stated, "I had not the foggiest idea what had actually occurred, nor would anyone explain anything to me." After returning to the base, he said, he was led to a man in civilian clothes, who advised me that this would be considered highly classified, and that I should not discuss it with anybody. Milton Torres told Britain's Sky News Miami that he had spent 50 frustrating years trying to uncover the truth of this mid-air encounter. Not much to go on here. What large object could easily outpace a F-860 Sabre in 1957, stay motionless, and reach speeds more than 7,600 miles per hour? April 15th, 1957.
A flying saucer was reported seen over Newcastle at 9:50 last night. 22-year-old Miss Maria Malik, of 166 Rye Hill, Newcastle, claims to have seen it. Miss Malik told an Evening Chronicle reporter that she was sitting at home watching television. There were other people in the room with her, but she was the only one who sat facing the window. She says she saw the saucer. It looked just like the flying saucers they show you, coming low from behind her bows and swooping up high as it went along. It was brightly lit, and it was the lights on the saucer which first caught her attention. She said that no one else in the room saw it, as the others were facing the other way.
The year is 1963. The place? At RAF Technical Training Establishment at Cosford near Wolverhampton, England. A UFO was witnessed by 2 RAF apprentices to either land or crash behind a hangar. On December 10th, 1963, at about 23:30 hours, 2 unnamed RAF apprentices witnessed a bright flying dome-shaped object. The object flew behind a hangar and either landed or crashed. The craft emitted a green light and swept the area. The witnesses observed the craft for 2 minutes and then ran to tell the duty officer. The 2 unnamed RAF apprentices were interrogated by the commanding officer about the incident. The most interesting part of this event is all the different stories that the RAF has given. The 2 young students, not altogether sober, have been up to a pre-Christmas prank and that there was an inquiry to the incident and some sketches were made. It then changed to sober apprentices, who had perpetrated a hoax and that the boys had constructed their own saucer. On January 9th, 1964, investigator Wilfred Daniels interviewed Flight Lieutenant Henry, the chaplain at RAF Cosford, who confirmed that the boys indeed witnessed a UFO landing which had terrified them. He stated that
they ran until they were in a building and could tell someone about it. They were told to sober up, but they were not drunk and are quite sane and sensible.
The chaplain explained, adding that he believed there would be a security clamp down on the incident. In 1963, at a public meeting, the former Minister of Defense, Harold Watkinson, made a curious statement.
Before I left the ministry, I had to sign a large number of papers promising never to reveal certain facts I had learned as Minister of Defense. The subject of flying saucers may be included.
There seems to be no doubt that something strange happened that night. The RAF story changed several times, making me raise an eyebrow. The year is 1967. The place? At Brixham, Devon, England. A cone-shaped UFO was witnessed by 8 Coast Guards. The object hovered and slowly rotated during that time. The incident lasted over 1 hour. On April 28, 1967, at about 11:30 hours, the witness, Coast Guard Brian Jenkins, observed the following through binoculars.
I could see that the thing was shaped like a cone with the sharp end pointing upward. It was white and shining brightly. It seemed as if it were made of glass or highly polished metal. Near the bottom, there was a triangular-shaped opening or door with a white rim on the top that reflected a lot of sunlight. The bottom was crinkled, very white, and seemed to consist of strips of metal hanging.
Jenkins contacted the RAF station at Mountbatten, Plymouth, who said they would contact the Ministry of Defense in London. At about 12:40 hours, an unknown conventional aircraft approached the UFO to investigate. Both the UFO and the unknown aircraft were lost in the clouds. The RAF advised that they had no knowledge of any aircraft or UFO. A spokesman for the MOD suggested that the object may have been something like the reflection of car headlights, or some sort of meteorological phenomena. Are we to believe that 8 trained observers from the Coast Guard cannot tell the difference between an object floating in the sky for over 60 minutes and car headlight reflections? As per usual, the official explanation is what sticks.
The year is 1967, the place, near Halsworthy, Devon in England. Police officers observed and chased a cross-shaped UFO for about 60 minutes. On October 24, 1967 at about 4 o'clock hours, police constables Roger Willey and Clifford Waycott were patrolling the A3072 between the two remote Devon towns. At this time the two officers spotted what later became known as the Devon Cross, a brightly illuminated, star-spangled cross capable of incredible speed and agility hovering just above the tree line. It was around the size of a commercial aircraft. The officers, who were just outside Hatherley at the time, tried to approach the object, making it as close as 400 meters before it started moving again. They said it gave the impression of watching them. After reporting it to Oakhampton Police Station, they set off in pursuit, hitting speeds of up to 90 miles per hour as they tried to keep up. It was to no avail. It was simply too quick for them as they spent almost an hour pursuing the bizarre object. The officers even woke up a man asleep in his car in a lay-by. On the 29th of February 26 holiday maker from Luton by the name of Christopher Garner. He confirmed what the officers had seen. Extra police units were dispatched to the scene, but nothing was found. It was definitely there and definitely either manned by some sort of being or remotely controlled. It was definitely being controlled to view our car, said PC Willie in black and white news footage from the time. PC Willie advised, on various points of its journey, it was attaining high altitude and it was down a tree, top level at other times. There was no sound that I heard at all. There was no outside sound apart from the car itself. Constable Willie just said, "Here we go then," and we drove off after it. Continued PC Waycott. It was just in front of us. We were traveling very fast. The acceleration of it was terrific, so we never got under it to hear any sound. Continued PC Waycott. The episode baffled police, and the RAF denied it was anything to do with them. They insisted no craft capable of both hovering on the spot and supersonic speeds had been invented. And not long afterwards, officials from the Ministry of Defense were sent in as an investigation began, results from which were classified until 2005. The officers were questioned, while also being reminded that they were bound by the Official Secrets Act. In an interview in 2004, Willie said it was something that I hadn't seen before, I haven't seen since, and something that nobody can explain exactly what it was. No explanation has been given to us by anybody, and we haven't tasked, said Waycott. We've just gently been asked to sweep it under the carpet. It didn't happen, that's what they said. But we know what we saw. The Ministry of Defense had come up with an explanation, but it was one they did not reveal until 38 years after the incident. They blamed the planet Venus, something which is frequently thought to be at the root of UFO sightings, especially as it can appear to be both close and exceptionally bright at around dawn. As a side note, on October 25, 1967, policemen in 5 police cars across East Sussex reported a bright flying cross in the early hours, with the first sighting at 4:45 a.m. at Halland. The other sightings were a few minutes later. My take. It is a well-known fact that the authorities have a tried and true methodology of explain them all away when it comes to UFOs. Swamp gas, Venus, ball lightning, and crazy witnesses are the go-to excuses for these types of events. I guess these 2 officers were so incompetent that they chased Venus for 1 hour and not a real UFO. What do you think? Resources: Howard Lloyd from DevonLive.com on January 15, 2020.
The year is 1967. The place? Moyne Downs, near Ringstead Bay, Dorset, England. A UFO was witnessed by a former RAF intelligence officer. The object hovered and eventually flew away at great speed. The incident lasted about 22 minutes. On October 26, 1967, at about 11:47 hours, the witness, former RAF intelligence officer Angus Brooks, observed an unknown flying craft that descended rapidly, leveling out 1/4 mile away from him at an altitude of 200 to 300 feet. The witness stated,
A central circular chamber with a leading fuselage in the front and 3 separate fuselages together at the rear. On slowing to hover position, the 2 outer fuselages at the rear moved to position at side of craft, to form 4 fuselages at equidistant position around center chamber. There were no visible power units and no noise of applied power for reverse thrust. Movement of fuselages. For hovering. On attaining hover, the craft rotated 90 degrees clockwise and then remained motionless, unaffected by very strong wind.
The witness also advised that the object remained motionless for the next 22 minutes while he noted further details.
The craft appeared to be constructed of a translucent material, and the central chamber was about 25 feet in diameter and the fuselages, or appendages, about 75 feet in length, making a total length of 175 feet. 2 of the fuselages moved around to line up with a center third fuselage, and the craft climbed with speed increasing and then disappeared.
The official investigation by the Ministry of Defense concluded that the witness had a vitreous floater on his eyeball. They also concluded that the witness fell asleep and dreamt the rest. Are we to believe that a well-trained observer from the RAF cannot tell the difference between an object floating in the sky for over 22 minutes and a floater in his eye? The official explanation is laughable at best. The year is 1967. The place? A section of the A338 road between Avon and Sopley, Hampshire, England. A UFO was witnessed by 3 travelers. A glowing, 15 feet wide egg-shaped UFO, which moved slowly across the road from the right to left, then accelerated and disappeared. On November 6, 1967, at about 01:30 hours, the witness, Carl Farlow, was driving his truck on the A338 roadway. The witness stated,
Before the object disappeared, a Jaguar car came from the opposite direction, and its lights and engine stalled. Our vehicles were stationary 25 to 30 yards from each other. The object was in between us. It glowed in the most beautiful green color I have ever seen. It was like nothing on earth. I sat in the cab petrified. I don't want ever to experience anything like that again. This was no hallucination.
The witness also stated that the lights of his diesel truck had suddenly and unaccountably failed. He also advised that the object made a sound like a refrigerator and gave off a smell like a drill boring through wood. After the object had gone, the driver of the Jaguar, a veterinary surgeon, suggested to Farlow that they phone the police from a nearby call box. The police arrived shortly afterwards and investigated. Everyone was interviewed. Police Constable Roy Nineham advised,
The most startling part of his report is that his lights failed and came on again when the object he saw disappeared.
A week after the incident, Farlow observed that a 200-foot stretch of the road had been completely resurfaced, as if to cover all traces of evidence. Was this object a military craft of some kind? Or something more exotic? If military in origin, the Avon UFO was clearly capable of exerting some very remarkable physical effects.
The year is 1973, the place, near Somerset, England. Gabriella Versixi was taken on board an alien spaceship near a small village in Somerset, England. She was physically inspected after being strapped to an examination table. On October 16, 1973, at about 2:00 a.m., Gabriella Versixi was driving on the motorway and had just passed the Langford-Budville, England exit. The highway seemed completely deserted, but she saw the glare of a single headlight ahead of her that seemed to be stationary. As she got closer, she saw that it was too bright to be a headlight. Her car suddenly began to lose power. The headlights flickered, dimmed, and then cut out. Next, the engine faltered, sputtered, then fell silent. Panic-stricken, Mrs. Versixi pressed her face to the windscreen, struggling to steer the car to a halt in the almost complete darkness. Thinking she could not stay there alone in the vehicle, she climbed out the car. She fumbled with the car hood as she lifted it, and as she stood there feeling helpless, she noticed a humming sound, faint at first, that seemed to be growing stronger. She could not see the source of the hum. As she stood facing the car, a heavy hand came down on her shoulder and pushed her to the ground. She struggled to face her assailant and saw a tall, dark-colored metallic figure. Gabriella then saw flickering multicolored lights and blacked out. When she came to, she was standing in a field. The robot-like figure was standing next to her, and before them stood a strange bright object. It was half-moon-shaped, rounded on top and flat on the bottom. It was silver-gray in color and rested on thick legs, of which she saw two, but there might have been more. It was about 20 feet in height and 40 feet across, and it had large, oblong windows in the middle from which yellow lights issued. Gabriella now realized that the humming sound came from this object. She then blacked out for a second time. She awoke inside a strange room. It was circular, and she was strapped to a table in the center. She was naked but covered with a light blue blanket. Her wrists were bound to the table by what she described as large rubber bands. Her spread-eagle legs were restrained in the same manner, with the bands holding her ankles to the cold surface of the table. The inside of the craft was freezing. She glanced over to a far wall where the robot stood inactive. To her right was a console covered in buttons and dials. The floor was covered in what appeared to be black-colored rubber matting. A few moments later, 3 humanoids that came into view probed her. 2 stood to the left of the table, while the third went to the foot of the table and picked up some boxes or cubes. He placed 3 of the objects on a rail, which ran the length of the table, 1 by her head, 1 by her feet, and 1 in the middle. As soon as the cubes were placed on the rail, they began to glow. The 3 humanoids were all about the same height, 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches tall. Fair-skinned and slim in build, they wore the same garments. All wore a skull cap, tied at the back of the head and ending just above the eyes. Face masks covered the nose and mouth, so only the eyes and upper face were visible. No hair was visible, but she could make out the hair bumps under the caps. The eyes were more rounded than normal human eyes, and seemed emotionless. All 3 humanoids wore a tunic with a gray-colored edging, long gloves that went to the elbows, and very long aprons that fell as far as their ankles. Thick-soled boots covered their feet. Every piece of clothing was light blue in color. Throughout the episode, none of the humanoids spoke or made any other noise. They looked at each other frequently and nodded occasionally. Furthermore, they did not appear to breathe, making no respiratory noises. During the examination, none of the three beings touched Gabriella. The humanoid at the bottom of the bed took a number of gray-colored instruments, which he used one by one. A small knife-like implement was used to take an ale pairing from her right hand index finger. A blood sample was taken with a small plastic-looking bottle with tubes and wires attached. Her blanket was removed and a thin pencil-like device was used to prod and probe her, and a large black rubber suction device was used on the area around the groin. Soon the examiner placed another blanket over her, which provided badly needed warmth. Noticing her frequent glances towards the now inactive robot, the examiner now spoke to her in perfect English. The robot was a trained retriever device. It did all the manual work outside the ship. It brought specimens for examination and study. It was merely an unthinking intelligence that was programmed to do certain tasks. The examiner spoke in a deep male voice, although Gabriella could not see his mouth move beneath the mask. His eyes never blinked, not even once. His movements appeared practiced, deliberate, and precise. When he completed his task, all three humanoids left the room together. After several minutes, Gabriella caught sight of the robot again. A flashing purple-colored light was coming from it. It did not move but remained by the wall. Soon one of the humanoids came into view from behind her and walked to the far end of the table. He lifted the end of the blanket from the bottom and stared at her body. At this point she felt something awful was going to happen, and Gabriella struggled with her bonds but could not free herself. The being took a small pin and placed it on her thigh. Gabriella stopped struggling immediately. The device caused numbness in every part of her body apart from her head. The being climbed slowly on the bottom of the bed and slowly and without emotion raped her. She felt discomfort but no pain. Soon the three humanoids came into the room and released her from the table. Gabriella looked down on the floor to see her clothes before passing out one more time that night. When she next regained consciousness, Gabriella was standing, fully clothed, next to her car in the deserted country road. Distraught, she drove home. My take. A terrifying tale for sure. I cannot think of a good reason why someone would make up a story like that. The alternative is very frightening. I could not find much about the aftermath of this encounter. Resources: Thomas E. Bullard, UFO Abductions. The Measure of the Mystery. The year is 1974. The place, Berwyn Mountain, in Llandrilo, Merionethshire, Wales. It's been called the Welsh Roswell, a cold, dark January night when the ground shook and bright lights appeared in the sky above the Berwyn Mountains. A UFO allegedly crashed on the Berwyn Mountain on January 23, 1974. Nighttime hours. Lights and noises were observed that were alleged to be related to a UFO sighting on Cadair Berwyn and Cadair Bronwyn, an incident which has remained surrounded by mystery ever since. Many explanations have been given for what went on in that part of North Wales that evening, from a meteor shower, an earthquake to downplane, or even lamp-wielding poachers on the hillside. But, for many, the belief that a UFO crashed high above Bala Lake, its alien inhabitants quickly spirited away in a military cover-up, has proved hard to shake. According to Northwellslive, that belief has resurfaced again following a fresh appeal for information in 2018 by a researcher looking to make a documentary about the phenomena for American TV. North Yorkshire UFO investigator Russ Kellett, who has been researching the Berwyn Mountains event for 25 years, has received a further 4 extraordinary claims by people from in and around the affected villages of Landerful and Landerlow who say they were either close to the incident or knew officials involved. One woman, who said she lived very nearby, told Kellett her dad worked for the Ministry of Defense and on that night she heard an enormous bang, the tremor from which measured 3.5 on the Richter scale, and that she and her brother were told to go back to bed. Later in the evening she could hear people talking in the house about making calls, and when she looked out of the window she saw something large being loaded onto the back of a truck, although she did not know what it was. She claimed there were a lot of soldiers in the area. Years later, her dad told her a Russian ship in the Irish Sea had fired a missile in the wrong direction and hit something which came down and was taken away by the military. Meanwhile, retired nurse Pat Evans, who believed an aircraft had crashed, drove to the site and saw a pulsating orange and red glow on the hillside and other lights. In addition, one ex-military man recalled how he'd been working in a team at one end of the A5 and claimed something catastrophic had gone wrong with an underground base that was not manned by people of this world. Finally, Kellett's findings also included a pensioner with links to the RAF and NASA, who stated the organizations had been developing a new weapon to bring down unidentified flying objects, and it had been used successfully that night. The ex-filer says he is keeping an open mind on the latest extraordinary claims in his continued attempts to try and piece together what happened that night. You have to be careful with any new claims that it may be what people have heard or read being repeated back to you, he said. Sometimes there are people who just like to be involved in an event such as this and want to say they were there. On the other hand, why would these people in their 50s, 60s, and 80s contact me to give me these stories? The people who contacted me appeared to be genuine. I have been researching this for 25 years now and am still trying to get to the bottom of what happened that night. My take. There is not much to go on here. No really good eyewitnesses. Anything could have happened on that mountain that night. Maybe a crashed UFO or more likely something more mundane. Resources. Summary from Nathan Bevan at walesonline.co.uk on December 27, 2018. The year is 1976, the place, somewhere over southern England. An official British Airways film taken during one of Concorde's flights over southern England depicts a white light moving around the fuselage of the aircraft. During the month of June 1976, British Airways was filming a promotional video of one of the first Concorde transatlantic flights. This 1976 footage was recorded by professional equipment from another aircraft that was escorting the Concorde. You can often hear the question, if UFOs appear so often, why are there no reliable videos on which they are captured? As you can see, there is, but at that time, despite the hype in society, after the publication of this video, the authorities were not going to admit the fact of their existence and quickly fabricated an authoritative opinion from respected specialists who, without hesitation, announced this UFO as glare. You can watch this footage for yourself, and you don't need to be a professor to see that when the UFO moves along the side of the plane, the reflection of its light can be seen on the windshield of the Concorde. This proves that this is not a camera artifact, flare, or glare, but a real object actually located in three-dimensional space. On the video you can see the Concorde flying, and a small white UFO drops down from above the Concorde and flies beside it for a while. The UFO then flies away. The UFO only appears to be a few feet across. My take. What we have here, folks, is a Foo Fighter. This is what the military were seeing during World War II. Foo Fighters is a term used by Allied aircraft pilots during World War II to describe various UFOs or mysterious aerial phenomena seen in the skies over both the European and Pacific theaters of operations. Resources. Summary from an Alien.com on June 26, 2021. The year is 1977. The place, Broadhaven Primary School in Pembrokeshire, United Kingdom. A cigar-shaped craft landed next to the primary school and was witnessed by 14 school children who saw a silver creature. On February 4, 1977, there were no alien invasions or tales of abduction. Yet a UFO sighting by a group of Pembrokeshire school children remains one of the most famous cases in Wales. It was 40 years ago when a class of pupils at Broadhaven Primary School said they spotted a UFO in a field near their playground. It was one of a wave of sightings in the area in 1977, dubbed the Dife Triangle. David Davies was 10 at the time and heard reports of pupils seeing flying saucers throughout the day. I was an natural-born skeptic, so after the bell rang I decided to go to the area that the children said they had seen it. He told BBC Wales. He described seeing a silver cigar-shaped craft with a dome covering the middle third. My sighting only lasted a couple of seconds. It popped up and then went back behind a tree. Mr. Davies said he did not feel afraid, more in awe and wonderment, although he admitted he had a strange desire to run away. None of the teachers believed the children, and so the headmaster separated them and got them to draw what they saw. There were slight variations, but what they drew was basically the same. Mr. Davies described the days that followed as a wild roller coaster. It went crazy with the media, and it was difficult to settle down and actually think about what we had seen. Official explanations were: there is general speculation in the neighborhood that a practical joker may be at work, wrote staff at S4, the government department that investigated sightings at the time. It was also thought school children could have confused a sewage tank as a UFO, although many were from farming backgrounds and would have been familiar with the machinery. More recently, a former U.S. Navy sailor said the figure in a silver suit was in fact a member of U.S. military personnel wearing their standard fireproof uniform, and the UFOs were new Harrier jets flying over. Neil Spring, who wrote a book based on the Broadhaven sightings, advised, "The moment I heard of this small village plagued by UFO sightings, I was inspired to understand what really happened," he said. His research uncovered a secret investigation by the military police. Whilst the government was telling the public they had no records of any unusual activity in the area, privately, officials were so concerned about the UFO sightings in Broadhaven that they asked the military police to conduct a discreet investigation. He said, Mr. Spring believes local pranksters were behind some of the sightings, but said people emulate what's happening around them, and the pranks were inspired by events which had been sincerely reported. My research showed that there were strange occurrences in Broadhaven long before the incident at the school and for long times afterwards. So you can take the children out of the story and you'll still have the story. My take. I like what Emil Williams of the Swansea UFO Network said about the incident. One child can lie, but can a whole class? Over 40 years at least one of them might have come forward to say they made it up. But they haven't. Resources. BBC.com on February 4, 2017.
The year is 1978. The place? Near Skipton, Yorkshire, England. Several British police officers witnessed a UFO silently flying slowly overhead. The object was extremely bright, and no known conventional aircraft matched its description. In January 1978, in the middle of the night, Sergeant Tony Dodd and Police Constable Alan Dale were driving in the vicinity of Cononley near Skipton, Yorkshire, in their official line of duty, when a strange aerial machine came into view. Dodd stated,
"We were going down a country lane and you know what it's like up there. It was dark and the only light you've got is your headlights. Suddenly the road in front of us lit up. Of course, the immediate reaction is, where's the light coming from? But it was coming from above. We stopped the car, looked up, and there was this thing coming from our right to our left. The object was about 100 feet away, moving at less than 40 miles per hour. It was glowing, like a bright white incandescent glow, and it came right over our heads. The whole unit was glowing. It was as if the metal of what this thing was made of was white hot. And there were these three great spheres underneath, like huge ball bearings, three of them equally placed around it. There was a hollow area underneath and like a skirting around the bottom. But these things protruded below that. It was absolutely awe-inspiring to see it. I don't know how to explain it to you. It was such a beautiful looking thing. It seemed to have portholes round the dome, an elongated domed area, and what stood out more than anything else was the colored lights dancing around on the outside of the skirt at the bottom, which gave the visual impression that it was rotating. Now whether the thing was going round, or whether it was just the lights that were going round and giving that impression, I don't know. I would say it was the lights that were going round because when you were looking at the portholes, they didn't seem to be going round in a circle as you would have expected. The object was completely soundless. When the thing had passed over our heads, it sort of went into the distance, then suddenly appeared to come down. There's a big wood to our left, right on a distant hillside, and it appeared to go down in that wood. We carried on along this road, and as we got toward the village we could see these lights coming toward us from the other direction. It was another police car. We stopped, and he said, "I've just been watching this damn great UFO, and it seems to have come right down somewhere over here."
A total of 3 policemen witnessed the mysterious object. There is no way this was a conventional aircraft, swarm gas, or any other dismiss out of hand type of explanations. Only 3 possibilities remain. 1. The police were lying for unknown reasons. 2. It was a secret advanced military aircraft of some kind. Or 3. It was a genuine alien craft of unknown origins. You decide.
The year is 1978, the Northamptonshire, England. The victim was driving her car in the late afternoon. At this time she had an encounter with a UFO which resulted in missing time. On November 22, 1978, at 17:15 hours, Elsie Oakenson of Churchstowe, Northamptonshire, was driving southbound down the A5 highway from Weedon Beck towards her home. When she approached the village of Churchstowe, Northamptonshire, she saw 2 very brilliant lights, a red one and a green one. She said that there had been much traffic, but that all was as in slow motion. The object she was looking at was dumbbell-shaped, made of very soft plastic, gray, without any openings or windows, and approximately 30 meters above the road. She did not want to stop on a high-traffic road where nobody else seemed to have seen the object. She drove on under the object, continuing towards Churchstowe, or her home in Weedon. When she left the main road, she took the lane which ended at her Weedon home, and the car stalled. There could have been 2 stops. Elsie advised. A green light started to flash. I decided to restart the engine, but when I turned into the village, something strange happened. The car, which had just been serviced that day, completely cut out. This is said to have occurred when she reached a line of trees at the entry of a farm. Eventually it restarted, but I had only traveled about 100 yards when it stopped again. The natural light disappeared and everything was in absolute blackness. Then suddenly a white circle shining of light approximately a meter in diameter shone on the road immediately after, as if somebody had pressed on a switch. The normal light returned and I drove my car normally. She realized that 15 minutes had passed, which she was unable to explain. After a single unsuccessful attempt to recover memory of the missing time by the use of hypnotic regression, carried out by Martin Keatman, one of the coordinators of the BUFORA Ufology Federation, she was encouraged to try creative visualization on the spot of her UFO sighting by British ufologist Ginny Randalls. Consequently, she was able to remember being led to a place where she was scanned by a brilliant light by shaded and gray forms, one long and thin and the other more rectangular, which appeared and disappeared several times in a fog. Both shone through this fog, in silver gray, smooth and round. She also remembered to feel heat and that her arm was shaking. Apparently, she was not completely satisfactory. She had the feeling that she had been rejected by the entities, who brought her back to her car. Ufologist Ginny Randalls reported that there had been an independent sighting less than 2 hours after the Oakenson encounter, approximately 4 miles away. 4 women, younger than Mrs. Oakenson but who did not know anything of her story, and reciprocally, drove through the village of Preston Capes, and saw colored lights similar to those which had alerted Elsie Oakenson, and then they saw parallel beams shot from a cloud. Their car began to lose power and the object paced them, until they entered the village lit by street lamps and the car returned to normal. The UFO lights now merged into one and vanished. Because no clear link between the two encounters had been established then, there was no continuation with these other witnesses to check whether they had also experienced missing time. Elsie Oakenson had been so much puzzled by her experience that she wrote 2 books, in 1995 and 1998, about what she thinks was a close encounter of the third kind with extraterrestrial forms of life. She expressed this opinion publicly. She continued to live in Church Stowe, writing articles for spelling journals. My take: there is not much to say about this. I only included it to be more thorough for my 1970s compilation. She is either crazy, lying, or something very unusual happened to her. What do you think? Resources: Ufology at Patrick Gressor. The year is 1979. The place, Didsbury, Manchester. Linda Jones and her 2 children witnessed a UFO craft landing and traveling towards them. Linda went closer to the hovering craft with bright orange lights. Linda experienced some missing time. She also had burn marks on her face from the event. Later, she went under hypnosis to recall what kind of mystery she experienced. In the summer of 1979 at around 9:00 p.m., 36-year-old Linda Jones and her 2 children, 5-year-old Christopher and 15-year-old Lisa, were walking along a river bank near Didsbury, Manchester, England. At this time, she advised. It was a summer evening. We were walking along, and I had this wildflower book with me, and I was getting the children interested and asking them. We started playing a little game really to see what that one's called. See if you can identify it. You know that flower. And then my daughter said, Mom, we looked up and we saw this sort of rugby ball shape, which was just hurtling towards us at an angle. We sort of crouched in the long grass quickly to avoid it, because our first thought being it was an aircraft on fire. Goodness me, my life flashed in front of me when I saw this thing. My daughter was absolutely terrified. We then ran up the hill to see what was going on, and we saw this object, which was shaped like a crescent moon. Oh my God, it was physical. It was a physical object. I felt like I could have gone up and touched it. I felt myself sort of drawn to it. Well, really, I just wanted to have a closer look, probably curiosity, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like a bad dream. My daughter called to me to come back. I didn't come back, and I don't actually remember going right up close to it. I got as close as I can, but it seemed to burn my face that the light was too bright. I have never seen anything like that in my life before that day, and have never seen anything since. We didn't look back. We just ran down the hill, and we ran as fast as we could. Linda turned around. She could see the object was moving alongside them. She picked up her younger son and screamed at Lisa to keep running. They made their way across an area of grassland. As they did, though, their surroundings began to appear distorted. The grass, for example, suddenly appeared almost 6 feet tall. And what's more, it was folding down on itself, as if something was pressing down on it. Despite her fear and the fact the behavior of the grass was the strangest thing I have ever seen, Linda continued running into it. Then, she could see their housing estate, still carrying Christopher and with Lisa only slightly behind her. The pair ran as fast as they could to their home, slamming the door shut behind them. Once inside, Linda noticed Trevor was already home. He looked at her and asked, "What's wrong with your eyes?" When Linda glanced into the mirror, she was shocked to see how red and swollen her eyes were, almost scaly. Then, she relayed what had just happened to her husband. Each of them would then draw pictures of the object while it was still fresh in their memory. It was only now that Linda realized she couldn't account for around 90 minutes of time. The incident, which began at just after 9 p.m., was no longer than 10 minutes in length, including the time it took to run home. However, after being back inside 10 minutes, she realized it was now 10:50 p.m. A little over a year passed before Linda began to delve back into the bizarre episode. However, in the winter of 1980, desperate to discover just what happened in those 90 minutes, she would undergo hypnotic regression. Hypnotist: "What's happening?" Linda: "I'm watching the lights." As someone standing next to them in the field. Hypnotist: "Then what?" Linda: "I'm floating. I'm in a room. There are 3 of them around me. 2 big almond-shaped ties. They're wearing jumpsuits of some kind. All in." Hypnotist: "What are they doing?" Linda: "Shining a light in my face. Legs feel so cold. I see." End of hypnotic session. Linda advised, I really can't believe it's so hard to take on board that sort of thing. And I'm just a very ordinary, normal, down-to-earth human being. Definitely wasn't into that sort of thing. I didn't like anything about science fiction. I've never been interested in that sort of thing at all. So, the answer was why me? Why us on that day? I'm definitely not prone to imaginary things. And it was definitely not an optical illusion. It's pretty hard for one person maybe to have an optical illusion, but for 3 people at the same moment in time to have an optical illusion. The odds are pretty small on that, aren't they? Aftermath of incident. Linda's menstrual cycle was randomly out of sync following the incident. Strange marks would appear on her body from out of nowhere, which would then also vanish just as quickly, sometimes within hours. She began to think there was a connection to the strange evening along the River Mersey. So much so, that she would eventually visit her doctor. When he began speaking of her recent pregnancy and miscarriage following her examination, she was shocked, to say the least. She hadn't been pregnant since giving birth to her son. Determined in his assessment, Linda would receive a referral to a specialist. They would confirm that scarring on her fallopian tubes was the result of an ectopic pregnancy. Linda was again shocked with disbelief at the findings. She was determined that she hadn't suffered a miscarriage, much less an ectopic pregnancy, which is extremely painful and can be fatal if not treated. Truly bizarre incidents would occur in the years that followed the incident too. For example, Several years after the encounter, she received a letter asking her to attend hospital for a test and examination. When she chased up results of this, the hospital had no records of her appointment or the doctor she had seen. She still receives these strange written requests for equally strange tests. She also has regular problems with her telephone connections and regular faults on the line. Another incident occurred with her husband in 1988 while driving back from Nottingham after visiting friends there. As they were making their way along the quiet country roads, on several occasions the car's headlights would fade almost to off before going back to full power. This caused Trevor to pull over to the side of the road, his visibility limited. His hope was to wait for a passing car and then follow it. Suddenly, Trevor told Linda to look up, and there in front and above was a large bright circular craft. It ascended slowly at first and shot upwards to nothing more than a dot with a second. A car drove past several moments later, causing them to put the sighting out of their minds as they followed the vehicle as it cut through the darkness in front of them. After several miles, though, the car just vanished. With the headlights seemingly working fine, Trevor continued, looking for a turning where the car might have gone. However, there was nothing but straight road. The couple also experienced 3 hours of missing time. My take. Linda's face was badly burned from the UFO. This adds some credibility to her story. Hard to think of a reason why she would lie about this. Was the hypnotic regression information about the day of the incident or another time? What do you think? Source: Marcus Loth at UFOinsight.com on February 25, 2019. The year is 1979. The place is a clearing on Detchment Law in Livingston, West Lothian, Scotland. Bob Taylor, a forestry worker, had an encounter with a UFO. The UFO dragged him along the ground. This is considered to be one of the most significant close encounters in Scotland. On November 9, 1978, at 10:30 a.m., Bob Taylor advised that he had been working alone checking fences and gates at Detchment Woods at 10:30 when he came across the spaceship in a clearing. After the spiked objects rushed out and tried to grab hold of him, all he could remember was a strong smell of burning. When he came to, the clearing was empty, apart from a pattern of deep regular marks on the ground. He went to his van, but was so shaken he drove it into a ditch and had to stagger home in a dazed condition. When he got to his house, he told his wife Mary he had been attacked by a spaceship thing. Because Mr. Taylor was in such a state, the police were called and officers found themselves inquiring into an assault on a forester by alien beings. Detective Constable Ian Ward, the scene of crime investigator, arrived at the clearing to find a large gathering of police officers were already there. There were about 32 holes, which were about 3.5 inches in diameter, as well as marks similar to those made by the type of caterpillar tracks often fitted on bulldozers. After examining every piece of machinery they had up there, "We did not find anything to match," he said. The police officer said that the unusual marks on the ground were only to be found in the clearing where Mr. Taylor had experienced his reported close encounter. "These marks just arrived," Detective Constable Wark said. "They did not come from anywhere or go anywhere. They just arrived as though a helicopter or something had landed from the sky." The police report from the time said the marks on the ground indicated an object of several tons had stood there, but there was nothing to show that it had been driven or towed away. PC William Douglas wrote, "There appeared to be no rational explanation for these marks. As part of the police investigation, Mr. Taylor's ripped trousers were sent for forensic examination, but this was many years before modern DNA techniques, so analysis concentrated on how the damage had been done. Police forensics said the trousers seemed to have been damaged by something hooking them and moving up. In his testimony to the police, the 61-year-old described how he saw a 30-feet-high dome-shaped object in a clearing in the forest near the West Lothian. He told how two spiked spheres then rolled out towards him, and as he passed out, he was aware of being grabbed on either side of his legs. Mr. Taylor woke up in a disheveled state 20 minutes later. Mr. Taylor, who died in 2007, was a respected war hero and teetotal churchgoer. No one doubted that he was sincere in what he believed he had seen, and throughout the rest of his life he never deviated from his story. Mr. Taylor's trousers are now in the possession of Malcolm Robinson, a ufologist who has been investigating such cases since the Detchment incident. He said they were police-issue blue serge trousers, and the type of rips in them did not happen by getting snagged as Mr. Taylor crawled away on the ground. Mr. Robinson, who has given lectures on the incident across the UK, Holland, France, and the US and written a book on the subject, said it was one of the most incredible cases in the world. He said it was one of very few hardcore cases that defied any explanation. Last year a UFO trail opened which takes people to the spot where a new town forestry foreman claims he saw an alien spaceship. My take. Bob Taylor kept to his story until his death in 2007. The marks on the ground have not been explained by anyone. My question is, why did the UFO attack him? When he was unconscious, what did they do to him? What do you think? Resources: Stephen Brockley-Hurst at BBC.com, November 9, 2019.
Today we'll be looking at a string of UFO events that occurred in Britain in the 1980s. Enjoy the video. The year is 1980. The place? Todmorden, Yorkshire, England. A UFO was witnessed by a police officer. The object was hovering in the middle of the road. A diamond-shaped object with a bank of windows and the bottom half rotating. The officer's radio also failed to work at this time. The officer experienced missing time, and he found himself down the road 100 yards with the object nowhere to be found. On November 29, 1980, at about 05 hours, the witness, Police Constable Alan Godfrey, stated,
I was driving a police car at the time, and in the early hours of the morning, I came across what I thought at that time was a bus that had slid across the road sideways. And when I approached the object, I got within about 20 yards of it and immediately I came across what I now would describe as a UFO. It was about 20 feet wide and 14 feet high and was diamond-shaped. It had a bank of windows in it and the bottom half was rotating. The police blue beacon was bouncing back off it, as were my headlights. It was hovering off the ground about 5 feet. And it was very frightening. Very frightening.
Godfrey's attempts to contact his base by radio, using both VHF and UHF, failed, so he decided to sketch the object on his clipboard. Suddenly, there was a bright flash, and he found himself 100 yards further down the road, and there was no sign of the UFO. He drove back to the scene and discovered the road was dry, despite it having rained. A bus traveling on the road stopped and the driver got out and noticed the same thing. Godfrey returned to the station but couldn't account for 25 minutes of what alien abduction researchers call missing time. He also had a split boot but couldn't account for it. Under hypnosis, arranged by solicitor Harry Harris several months later, he recalled seeing small beings and a tall man with a beard on the craft, who conducted medical tests on him. What are we to make of this very unusual occurrence from 1980? There are only a few possibilities. 1. The officer is lying for some unknown reason. What would the officer have to gain by lying? I think it's unlikely, but it cannot be discounted. 2. The officer is crazy. If the officer is crazy, he would have been let go from the force and not allowed to continue service. 3. An unusual alien craft encountered the officer and abducted him for a short period of time. If true, then this is very significant. We need to know more. 4. A secret military craft encountered the officer and abducted him for a short period of time. If true, then this is very significant. We need to know more. I think this would be even more frightening. Think about it. The year is 1980. The place? Rendlesham Forest, near Ipswich, Suffolk, England. A UFO was witnessed by military personnel in the forest. The object had landed or crashed in the woods. It was described as a strange, glowing object, metallic in appearance and triangular in shape, approximately 2 to 3 meters across and 2 meters tall. As the patrolmen approached the object, it maneuvered through the trees and disappeared. On December 27, 1980, at about 03 hours, the witness, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, U.S. Air Force Deputy Base Commander at Woodbridge at the time, stated,
"Early in the morning of the 27th of December 80 approximately 0300 two USAF security police patrolmen saw unusual lights outside the back gate at RAF Woodbridge. Thinking an aircraft might have crashed or been forced down, they called for permission to go outside the gate to investigate. The on-duty flight chief responded and allowed 3 patrolmen to proceed on foot. The individuals reported seeing a strange glowing object in the forest. The object was described as being metallic in appearance and triangular in shape. Approximately 2 to 3 meters across the base and approximately 2 meters high. It illuminated the entire forest with a white light. The object itself had a pulsing red light on top and a bank of blue lights underneath. The object was hovering or on legs. As the patrolmen approached the object, it maneuvered through the trees and disappeared. At this time the animals on a nearby farm went into a frenzy. The object was briefly sighted approximately an hour later near the back gate. The next day, 3 depressions 1.5 inches deep and 7 inches in diameter were found where the object had been sighted on the ground. The following night, the 29th of December 80, the area was checked for radiation. Beta, gamma readings of 0.1 milliroentgens were recorded with peak readings in the 3 depressions and near the center of the triangle formed by the depressions. A nearby tree had moderate 0.05.07 readings on the side of the tree toward the depressions. Later in the night, a red sun-like light was seen through the trees. It moved about and pulsed. At one point it appeared to throw off glowing particles and then broke into 5 separate white objects and then disappeared. Immediately thereafter, 3 star-like objects were noticed in the sky, 2 objects to the north and 1 to the south, all of which were about 10 degrees off the horizon. The objects moved rapidly in sharp angular movements and displayed red, green, and blue lights. The objects to the north appeared to be elliptical through an 812 power lens. They then turned to full circles. The objects to the north remained in the sky for an hour or more. The object to the south was visible for 2 or 3 hours and beamed down a stream of light from time to time. Numerous individuals, including the undersigned, witnessed the activities in paragraphs 2.
News of the Woodbridge incident first leaked out in January 1981, when Brenda Butler was approached by a U.S. Air Force security officer who had proven to be a reliable source of information in the past. Given the pseudonym of Steve Roberts by the authors of Sky Crash, he confided that a UFO had crash-landed in Rendlesham Forest on the night of December 27th, and that he had himself witnessed its 3 small silver-suited occupants carrying out repairs while suspended in the shaft of light. The craft had remained on the ground for several hours, he claimed, during which time General Gordon Williams, overall base commander at the time, had communicated with the aliens. Many military personnel were present, and films and photos were taken which were immediately confiscated by senior officers when the craft had taken off. Another witness going by the name James Archer advised that he was a security officer that night, and advised that at about 2 a.m., guards at the Woodbridge gate had seen lights apparently descending out of sight into Rendlesham Forest. The guards radioed for permission to investigate, but were told to wait until relief guards could be sent to replace them. Thus Archer and another security officer, Airman John Burroughs, real name, were ordered to drive out to the area in a jeep, leaving their guns behind. Since the lane from the gate were full of ruts and potholes, the 2 men were obliged to proceed on foot. After a short while, their radio suddenly went dead. Then they came across the object. Archer described it as triangular in shape, with 3 landing legs. It was about 10 to 12 feet in diameter, and 8 feet high, with a blue light on top, red lights and a white light in the middle, and a brighter white light emanating from the underside. Archer was emphatic that no alien occupants were involved, although he was sure that something was inside the object. I don't know what, but the shapes did not look human. Maybe they were like robots. The two men followed the object as it maneuvered silently around the forest, and at one stage got to within a few feet of it. They followed the craft as it moved into a small field, where it caused panic among the cows. Finally, the object emitted an intense burst of white light, rose to about 200 feet, and then shot off at high speed. Yet another witness, Sergeant Larry Warren, who was stationed at Bentwaters at the time, advised that the date of the actual landing was the 30th, not the 27th of December. He says that the jeep in which he and other security officers were riding in en route to the landing site kept failing. On arrival at a clearing in the forest, he encountered other groups of military personnel, including RAF officers. He could hear helicopters overhead. A movie camera was pointing towards something which looked like a transparent aspirin tablet, hovering just above the ground, about 50 feet in diameter, surrounded by security officers. A bright red light approached from behind the trees, descended silently over the aspirin, and then exploded in a multiple-colored burst of light. Both the aspirin and light vanished, leaving in their place a large domed disc with intricate patterns on its surface. Warren and a couple of colleagues approached it, but the next thing he recalls is being back in bed at the Bentwaters base. Together with other witnesses, he was ordered to see the base commander, who told them all that they must not discuss what had happened, as it had a high security level. Warren also claims as clothes would check for radioactivity. He learned from other witnesses that those who had been on the far side of the object, i.e. opposite his position, had seen small alien beings. He was also told that false trails had been laid in the forest and that stories of alien contact were invented in order to discredit the entire story. Warren, 19 years old at the time, later told his family about the incident, as a result of which he claims he was given an honorable discharge from the Air Force. A further witness came forward. Sergeant Adrian Bastinza, the security police acting commander at Woodbridge, advised,
"We were in the alert area, and I was on my way over to RAF Woodbridge base at around midnight. While we were over there, one of my patrols sighted an object of some sort. It was like a fire in the forest area. I notified my acting commander, which was Lieutenant England, and he went ahead and called the commander that night, which was Colonel Holt, and he told Lieutenant England to check out the situation. We proceeded to check out the situation, myself and Lieutenant England and Sergeant Ball. What I remember clearly was that when we got there, Colonel Holt pointed to the individuals he wanted to go with him. So we went back to Bentwaters base, grabbed 2 light alls, and had a patrol refuel them. And once we refueled them, we took them out there to see if we could light up the area to see if there was anything out there. In the process of trying to check the light alls, everything was malfunctioning. When we got to point of the sighting of the object, we had trouble turning the light alls on. Our truck wouldn't run, either. It was kind of like all the energy had been drained out of both light all units. We started to search. One individual had said he had spotted the object, like sitting on the ground. We proceeded to look and in the process found kind of like triangular tripods, burned into the ground at 3 different standpoints. They were like it was a heavy object. They took radiation readings of the holes, and they got a radiation reading as I recall. Then I recall we were walking through the woods and we came upon the lights again. And that's when I first saw the object. I think it was the Flight Chief Sergeant Ball, and I believe another individual officer. We kept searching the area, kind of like trying to follow the object, and it was moving through the trees. And in the process, we came upon a yellow mist, about 2 or 3 feet off the ground. It was like dew, but it was yellow, like nothing I've ever seen before. We kind of, like, ignored it. We were worried about the object, to see if we could locate it again, or catch up to it again. We did see the object again. It was hovering low, like moving up and down anywhere from 10 to 20 feet. Back up, back down, back up. There was a red light on top and there were several blue lights on the bottom. But there was also like a prism, rainbow lights on top, and several other colors of light. It was a tremendous size. It even surprised me that it was able to fit into the clearing. A tremendous size, and I use the word tremendous carefully. It was a round, circular shape. I hate to say like a plate, but it was thicker at the center than it was at the edge.
Bastinza and the other witnesses were ordered to form a perimeter around the object at about 15-foot intervals. After observing the object for about 30 minutes, Bastinza says it took off suddenly.
It was gone in a flash, almost like it just disappeared. When it left, we were hit by a cold blast of wind which blew toward us for 5 or 10 seconds. It was a really scary feeling. I was just frozen in place at first. My life actually passed in front of my eyes.
A tape recording of the incident was eventually released, known as the Halt tape.
1:48. We're hearing very strange sounds out of the farmer's barnyard animals. They're very, very active, making an awful lot of noise. You just saw a light. Slow down. Where? Right on this position. Here. Straight ahead in between the trees. There it is again. Watch. Straight ahead off my flashlight. Sir, there it is.
I see it too. What is it?
We don't know, sir.
It's a strange, small red light. Looks to be maybe a quarter to a half mile. Maybe further out. I'm gonna switch off. The light is gone now. It was approximately 120 degrees from our site. Is it back again?
Yes, sir. Well, douse flashlights then. Let's go back to the edge of the clearing so we can get a better look at it. See if you can get the starscope on it. The light's still there and all the barnyard animals have gone quiet now. We're heading about 110, 120 degrees from the site out through to the clearing now. Still getting a reading on the meter. We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everywhere else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. Sir, it's yellow.
I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. It's brighter than it has been. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
2 lights. One to the right and one light to the left.
Keep your flashlights off. There's something very, very strange. Keep the headset on. See if it gets any. Pieces are falling off it again.
It just moved to the right. Yeah, strange. Let's approach to the edge of the woods up there. Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. Still moving from side to side. And when you put the starscope on it, it's like this thing has a hollow center. A dark center, like the pupil of an eye looking at you. Winking. And it flashes so bright in the starscope that it almost bums your eye. We've passed the farmer's house and across into the next field, and now we have multiple sightings of up to 5 lights with a similar shape and all, but they seem to be steady now rather than a pulsating or glow with a red flash. We've just crossed a creek and we're getting what kind of readings now? We're getting 3 good clicks on the meter and we're seeing strange lights in the sky.
2:44. We're at the far side of the second farmer's field and made sighting again about 110 degrees. This looks like it's clear off to the coast. It's right on the horizon. Moves about a bit and flashes from time to time. Still steady or red in color. Also after negative readings in the center of the field. We're picking up slight readings. 4 or 5 clicks now. On the meter. 3:05. We see strange strobe-like flashes to the Well, they're sporadic, but there's definitely some kind of phenomenon. 3:05. At about 10 degrees. Horizon. Directly north, we've got 2 strange objects. Half-moon shape. Dancing about with colored lights on them. That, guessed to be about 5 to 10 miles out. Maybe less. The half-moons are now turning to full circles. As though there was an eclipse or something there. For a minute or two. 03:15. Now we've got an object about 10 degrees directly south. 10 degrees off the horizon. And the ones to the north are moving. One's moving away from us.
It's moving out fast. This one on the right's heading away too. They're both heading north. Okay, here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
03:30. And the objects are still in the sky, although the one to the south looks like it's losing a little bit of altitude. We're going around and heading back toward the house. The object to the south is still beaming downlights to the ground. 04:00 hours. One object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon. Still moving erratic, and similar lights and beaming down as earlier.
It is clear that something very unusual occurred in December 1980 at Rendlesham Forest, even though witness statements have some conflicts. What was it? An experimental military craft of some sort? Was it a craft from another planet? The official response is that nothing of significance occurred on that night. Whatever it was, several military personnel witnessed something that cannot be dismissed out of hand. The year is 1980. The place? Southeast London, England. The UFO was witnessed by multiple witnesses hovering in the sky for over 1 hour. The object then accelerated and disappeared vertically. On December 15th, 1980, at about 16:07 hours. The witness, Timothy Good, was walking back to his apartment when he witnessed something unusual in the sky. The witness stated,
"Walking back to my flat in southeast London on the 15th of December 1980. My attention was drawn to a bright star-like object in the cloudless sky, which appeared to be motionless at an elevation of about 65 degrees to 75 degrees. The time, I noted, was 4:07 p.m., realizing that it was in the wrong position for Venus. I considered the possibility that it might have been a balloon or an aircraft reflecting the last rays of the sun, but naturally wondered if it could have been a UFO. I dashed the remaining distance back home, where I intended observing the object through my refractor telescope and taking photographs and movie film if necessary. I opened all the windows and scanned the sky, but there was no sign of anything apart from a few distant airliners. The time was now about 4:15 p.m.
The next day, the witness received information from a Kentish Times reporter that at least 40 witnesses had observed the same object. Peter McSherry, clerk for works for Lovell, advised the following.
The object was first seen at 3 p.m. directly above the site. He told me and was apparently motionless. Shortly afterward, an aircraft was seen passing below the object, and the UFO proceeded to move across the sky and stop. After a while, a puff of vapor emitted from the object, which then began to move slowly across toward the east, where it again remained stationary. Mr. McSherry fetched his 20x binoculars and was then able to see that the object was of an elongated triangular shape, with a reddish-orange nose, silvery body, and diamond blue rear section, with its nose pointing southeast. He estimated the object's altitude to be 50.000 feet, which can only be very approximate since its size was not known. The UFO then turned over on its axis and pointed the nose toward the west. Another puff of vapor appeared, and in seconds it had traversed the 76 December 1980-77 sky and returned to its original position directly above the site. At 3:20 p.m. it turned over on its axis again and moved slowly across the sky. By this time at least 40 people, including hospital engineers as well as workmen from Lovells, were observing the object, which remained stationary in the west. At 3:35 p.m. it turned on its axis yet again and shot off toward the moon at fantastic speed. Eventually, it returned to the east where it remained until 4 p.m., at which time it turned on its axis and, emitting a puff of vapor from its tail section, accelerated at thousands of miles per hour and returned to its original position above the site. At 4:15 p.m. the nose was pointing toward the west, but it then turned upward and seemed to divide into two distinct objects which took off vertically, leaving two vapor trails for a moment before disappearing.
A low magnification video of the incident surfaced which shows an unknown object in the sky. Although the object is indistinct, the record comments of the witnesses as they describe its maneuvers are invaluable. Obviously, something was observed in this incident. The object moved in such a manner that negates the possibility of a balloon or the planet Venus. If military in origin, then the object had capabilities way beyond 1980's expected capabilities, or even of currently known technologies of 2021. The year is 1981. The place? Plymouth, England. A large, silent UFO was witnessed hovering over houses in the middle of the night. The witness was struck by a green beam which caused her to be temporarily paralyzed. On September 10th, 1980, at about 23:15 hours, the witness, Denise Bishop, returned home from work. At this time, the witness observed something very unusual at the back of her house. The witness stated,
"The object was unlit, and a dark metallic grey, but coming from underneath it and shining down on the rooftops. Beneath it were 6 or 7 broad shafts of light. These were in lovely pastel shades of pink and purple, and there was also white. I saw all this in an instant, and I was terrified. I hurriedly reached for the door, but as I put my hand on the handle, from the unlit side of the craft a lime green colored pencil beam of light came and hit the back of my hand. As soon as it touched my hand I couldn't move and was stopped dead in my tracks, paralyzed. The beam stayed on my hand for at least 30 seconds, in which time I could only stand and watch the UFO. I was very frightened. Although the UFO was a fantastic sight to see, it was huge and silent. In fact, the whole area around about seemed very quiet. The green beam, which gave off no illumination and was rather like a rod of light, then switched off, and I continued to open the back door. It was in fact as though a film had been stopped and started again. I had been stopped in mid-stride, and when the beam went off I continued with the same movement as before. I opened the door and rushed into the house. As I did so, I saw the UFO lift up into the sky slightly and then begin moving away out of my sight. Rubbing my hand, I ran and told my sister. Together we went outside again. But there was now nothing to be seen. We went in again and my sister examined my hand. But there was nothing there to see. I sat down and a few minutes later my sister's dog began sniffing at the hand and made it sting. On looking at it again I now noticed spots of blood on it. And after I had washed it I saw that it was burned.
The witness called the police and they would not take a report from her. They put her on to Bob Boyd of the Plymouth UFO Research Group who investigated the incident. On arrival at Denise's house, Bob took a couple of black and white photographs of the burn mark, which appeared as a patch of shiny skin with spots of blood and bruising. It looked as if a patch of skin had been removed, exposing the shiny, new skin beneath, Bob reported. He tried to persuade Denise to go to the casualty ward at the local hospital, but she refused. 2 days after the incident, Denise's wound appeared still very sore. A week after the incident, she had a fully formed scab over her burn. After 3 months, she was left with a pale mark resembling a birthmark. This case has a credible witness with no obvious reason for lying about the incident. There is also the evidence of the burn on the witness's hand, which was quite real and photographed. I see the possibilities here as an alien craft of some kind, or even an alien reproduction vehicle up to no good. If military in origin, then the object had abilities way beyond the 1980s expected capabilities, or even of currently known technologies of 2021. The year is 1983. The place? Basingstoke Canal in Aldershot, Hampshire, England. The witness was fishing in the early hours of the morning. At this time, the witness was approached by two small, humanoid figures with helmets on. The humanoids and witness walked around the bend to a waiting 45-foot diameter craft which was sitting on the towpath. The witness entered the craft and after a short while was told he could leave. After the witness left the craft, it flew away at a high rate of speed. On August 12, 1983, at about 00:15 hours, the witness, Alfred Bertu, went fishing at Basingstoke Canal in Aldershot, Hampshire. At about 01 hours, the witness experienced a very unusual event. The witness stated,
I saw a vivid light coming toward me from the south, which is over North Town. It wavered over the railway line and then came on again. Then settled down. The vivid light went out, though I could still see a light through the boughs of the trees. I thought, well, that can't be an airplane, it's too low because it was at about 300 feet. During this time I had set the cup down on the tackle box and lit a cigarette. And while smoking it my dog began to growl. It was then that I saw two forms coming toward me. And when they were within 5 feet of me they just stopped and looked at me, and I at them. For a good 10 or 15 seconds. Tiny, an obedient dog, had stopped growling by this time. On her master's command. They were about 4 feet high, dressed in pale green coveralls from head to foot. And they had helmets of the same color with a visor that was blacked out. Then the one on the right beckoned me with his right forearm and turned away. Still waving its arm, I took it that he wished me to follow. Which I did. He moved off and I fell in behind him. And the chap that was on the left fell in behind me. We walked along the towpath until we got to the railings by the canal bridge. The form in front of me went through the railings, while I went over the top. And we crossed Government Road, then went down on the footpath. Going around a slight left-hand bend I saw a large object, about 40 to 45 feet across, standing on the towpath, with about 10 to 15 feet of it over the bank on the left of the path. And I thought, Christ, what the hell's that? Didn't think about UFOs at the time. When we got down there this form in front of me went up the steps and I followed. The steps were offline to the towpath and we had to step onto the grass to go up them. Portholes were set in the hull, and the object rested on two ski-type runners. Going in the door, the corners weren't sharp, they were rounded off. We went into this octagonal room. The form in front of me crossed over the room. And I heard a sound as if a sliding door was being opened and closed. I stood in the room to the right of the door, and the form that had walked behind me stood just inside. Between me and the door. I don't know whether it was to stop me going out or not. I stood there a good 10 minutes, taking in everything I could see. The walls, the floor, and the ceiling were all black, and looked to me like unfinished metal, whereas the outside looked like burnished aluminum. I did not see any sign of nuts or bolts. Nor did I see any seams where the object had been put together. What did interest me most of all was a shaft that rose up from the floor to the ceiling. The shaft was about 4 feet in circumference, and on the right-hand side of it was a Z-shaped handle. On either side of that stood 2 forms, similar to those that walked along the towpath with me. All of a sudden a voice said to me, "Come and stand under the amber light." I could not see any amber light until I took a step to my right. And there it was way up on the wall just under the ceiling. I stood there for about 5 minutes. Then a voice said, "What is your age?" I said, "I shall be 78 next birthday." And after a while I was asked to turn around. Which I did, facing the wall. After about 5 minutes he said to me, "You can go. You are too old and infirm for our purpose." I left the object, and while walking down the steps I used the handrail and found it had 2 joints in it. So I came to the conclusion it was telescopic. I walked along the towpath to about halfway between the object and the canal bridge. Stopped, and looked back and noticed that the dome of the object looked very much like an oversized chimney cowl and that it was revolving anti-clockwise. I then walked on to the spot where I had left my dog and fishing tackle. And the first thing I did when I got there was to pick up my cold cup of tea and drink it. And then I heard this whining noise, just as if an electric generator was starting up. And this thing lifted off and the bright light came on again. It was so bright that I could see my fishing float in the water 6 feet away from the opposite bank of the canal. And the thin iron bars on the canal bridge. The object took off at a very high speed, out over the military cemetery in the west. And then a little later I saw the light going over the Hog's Back and out of sight. This was around 2:00.
The year is 1984. The place? Stanmore, Middlesex, England. Several British police officers and 1 civilian witnessed a UFO flying over Stanmore. The object changed colors multiple times, and at one point it emitted a large ball of light which shot towards the ground and alarmed the witnesses. After 3 hours, the object flew away towards the M1 highway. On April 26, 1984, at about 21:45 hours, the witness, Ruth Novelli, of Bushy, observed an object in the sky from her backyard. The witness stated,
"My next-door neighbor knocked on my door and asked me to see what it was. I looked up and there was a light in the sky that was changing colors from pink to yellow to blue. It was also moving back and forth and up and down, but we weren't close enough to see it. My neighbor called the RAF to see whether they had anything up there and they didn't. So she called the police. The police blocked off the road and took pictures with a telescopic lens. I didn't know what it was. I wasn't scared. Just mystified. It was there for 3 hours."
Police Constable Richard Milthrop reported that the object was initially observed at an elevation of about 45 degrees, but after about 15 minutes, it moved to the right and slightly higher. It was he who drew the sketch of the object, which he described as circular in the middle with a dome on top and below. Richard Milthrop stated,
"The dome on top had blue and white flashing lights, while the dome underneath was blue, green, white, and pink. It was moving erratically up and down and to and fro."
A total of 8 policemen witnessed the mysterious object. One of the police officers took photographs, but these did not come out at all. According to the police area press officer, some of the police officers chased the UFO by car for a short distance, but the object was already fading from view by that time.
The year is 1988. Author and UFO researcher Timothy Good releases his book called Above Top Secret. Using documented research and personal testimony, the author asserts that evidence of life on other planets and of visits to Earth by alien spacecraft has been suppressed by various governments around the world. Timothy Good is widely regarded as one of the world's leading experts on alien phenomena, known for his integrity and determination as a highly skilled researcher. He has lectured at the Royal and Canadian Military Institute, Royal Naval Air Station, the House of Lords All-Party UFO Study Group, the Institute of Medical Laboratory Sciences, and the Oxford and Cambridge Union Societies. In May 1998, he was invited to the Pentagon to discuss alien activity, and he lectured at the headquarters of the French Air Force in 2002. He has also acted as consultant for several U.S. congressional investigations. He is the author of Above Top Secret, Alien Contact, Alien Base, Unearthly Disclosure, and Need to Know, UFOs, the Military, and Intelligence. Tim lives in England. The book Above Top Secret was originally published in 1988. Today's video is a thank you video to Timothy Good for his great book that helped change my view of the world. I have leaned heavily on the Above Top Secret book for my videos as his book is just so awesome. I bought my copy in 1989 at the world's biggest bookstore in Toronto. If I remember correctly, there was a big hubbub about the book's release. I strongly recommend trying to get a copy.